extraordinary courage. A religious sister steps in during a violent attack at a church in France. We share the details. Ukraine solidarity. Two top American officials visit Ukraine to meet the embattled country's president. Religious freedom. The U.S. Supreme Court hears a case involving prayer at public schools. And a bouquet for Our Lady. A championship soccer team in Spain has reason to give thanks. On EWTN News Nightly for Monday, April 25th, 2022. Thank you so much for being with us tonight on this Feast of St. Mark. I'm Tracy Sable. A Catholic nun is praised for extraordinary courage for thwarting a knife attack which critically injured a priest in southern France. A 72-year-old sister disarmed the assailant as he was stabbing the celebrant before Mass yesterday in Nice. She was injured as a result. The 57-year-old priest received multiple wounds to his chest. Both were hospitalized. Police say the apprehended suspect has psychiatric problems. Meanwhile, voters in France have given President Emmanuel Macron a second term.
Merci.
Macron says his victory affirms his priorities against nationalist challenger Marine Le Pen, who achieved higher support in their rematch. The next test comes in June when parliamentary elections decide the majority in the National Assembly. Back here in the United States, the Supreme Court is tackling a dispute regarding prayer in public schools. The justices heard arguments today in a case involving a former high school football coach in Washington state. School officials told him to stop praying on the field following games. The coach, who is a Christian, says the request violates his freedom of speech. The school district says it offered the coach other places to pray in private, but he refused. A decision is expected in late June before the court begins its summer recess. And joining us now with analysis is Angela Morabito from the Defense of Freedom Institute for Policy Studies. Angela, welcome. Great to have you on with us. Let's talk a little bit more about this case, which goes back to 2015, and really what's at the heart here.
It's so disappointing what this school district has done to Coach Kennedy. He was a football coach who decided he wanted to pray silently to himself on the 50-yard line after games, and the school district decided to take issue with this, and they chose not to renew his contract. So now this man is out of a job, and the Defense of Freedom Institute has filed an amicus brief in this case, saying that you do not check your religious freedom rights at the schoolhouse door. This coach had every right to pray. He wasn't disturbing anyone, and we hope that the Supreme Court will see this cut and dry case for what it is.
Angela, talk to us about, why this is so important when it comes to the First Amendment and freedom of religion.
Well, freedom of religion applies everywhere, including in public schools. And if you're not allowed to bow your head and pray on a football field, you also might not be allowed to bow your head and pray before you eat lunch in the cafeteria. So Coach Kennedy really tried to do the right thing here. There was a point where he was praying in the locker room with students. The school district asked him not to. He complied, but that wasn't enough. And then some of the players noticed that he would go pray on the field after games, and they asked if they could join. And he said to them, it's a free country. So that's the ultimate irony here, that this coach recognizes it's a free country, but unfortunately his school district didn't.
And I want to talk about the oral arguments now that took place today. What was your take? Any sense as to how the court may be leaning?
It's really tough to read the tea leaves here, but we're optimistic that the court is going to see that religious freedom applies everywhere. Some of the quote-unquote reasonable accommodations the school tried to give this coach just weren't reasonable at all. They tried to stick him in a janitor's closet and said, all right, you go, walk over here, hide your faith, literally shove it in a closet. He said, no way. And I believe he was right to do that. So the Defense of Freedom Institute in our amicus brief lays out the facts of this case and says, this should be so simple. It's remarkable that this even got to the Supreme Court, because the facts that these justices began to hear today, clearly show that he was simply exercising his First Amendment rights.
I understand that one of the justices today suggested that the coach's post-game prayer may be seen as a form of coercion. Talk to us more about that and your thoughts.
Well, there was nothing coercive about this prayer, really. He hadn't said, hey, everyone come pray with me. There were a few players who noticed he was doing so, and on their own volition, they decided to join. The opposition is trying to falsely spin this as a pray-to-play situation when that's just not the case. He was taking action to pray for himself, not directed at any other individual. And in fact, many times while he was doing this, students were either singing the fight song or walking through the stands after the game. So the idea that this was somehow mandatory or pushed on students is not true.
Ultimately, how do you think this will play out in the end?
I anticipate that the court will recognize Coach Kennedy's freedom to pray, and that will be good news, not just for him, but for students and educators all across the country who will have their religious freedom rights upheld. The Supreme Court really ought to recognize here that, yes, you maintain your right to pray no matter where you are, including in a public school. And the saying goes that as long as there are tests in school, there will be prayer in school. So I think there's a lot more prayer going on than folks tend to recognize, and I think all of that prayer deserves to be protected.
All right, we'll see what happens. Before I let you go, not a whole lot of time left, but I want to pivot here and get your thoughts on some breaking news. Twitter's board of directors accepted Elon Musk's bid to buy the social media platform. And as you know, free speech is at the heart of this as well. Your thoughts on all of this?
I'm in support of anything that allows people to speak more freely. And I think the reaction on Twitter itself today has been really illuminating because you see who's excited about free speech and who is afraid of it. And it's unfortunate that people don't see the benefit of allowing free and open discourse in the public square. Look, I don't know Elon Musk's politics, and I kind of like it that way. It's going to be nice to have someone in charge who just supports the ability to speak freely. And he tweeted as much today. I'm excited to see what he does with the platform.
All right, we're going to leave it right there. Angela, thank you so much for your time today and your insights. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Tracy.
With inflation rising and COVID cases climbing, once again, lawmakers return to Washington this week. Democrats see these as make or break issues ahead of November's midterm elections. Capitol Hill correspondent Eric Rosales reports.
The Democrats' list of priorities include items that have been bogged down here in Congress for weeks, if not months. They want President Biden's social spending plan passed, along with another $10 trillion in COVID relief for vaccine research.
It's essential to get back to normal. All those on the other side who said, let's get back to normal, should all be voting for this bill. Because if, God forbid, another variant comes and we're not prepared, we will not be getting back to normal.
But there's a hitch. President Biden announced he's ending Title 42, a Trump administration rule allowing for quick deportation of migrants for COVID reasons.
I think that's a mistake. There are other alternatives for them, but so far they've shown zero interest in trying to secure our border or prevent the spread of COVID-19 across the border.
New COVID money is stalled because Republicans and some Democrats want to keep Title 42 in place until the White House comes up with a border security plan. Then there's the president's social spending agenda.
The Build Back Better legislation, I don't know what that will be, but what it will be paid for. It will be non-inflationary. It will help reduce the national debt while it meets the needs of America's working families.
The original $2 trillion bill was scuttled late last year by Catholic Senator Joe Manchin, a Democrat, citing costs along with inflation concerns. Democrats are targeting July 4th to pass a trimmed-down version. Republicans say more needs to be done.
Is getting the economy open. The best way right now to get relief to families and small businesses is to open up all the economy, end all the mandates.
Democrats worry inaction could lead to losing the House and Senate in November.
I think we're going to be in real trouble if we don't get up and deliver. Then I believe that Democrats are going to lose.
Senators will also be remembering former Utah Senator Orrin Hatch, the longest-serving Republican in history. He died Saturday at the age of 88. At the Capitol, Eric Rosales, EWTN News Nightly.
As President Joe Biden returned to the White House today, he was asked about a key trip that a couple of his top cabinet members just took to Ukraine. White House correspondent Owen Jensen reports. Owen?
Tracy, President Biden told reporters today it went good. He was referring to Secretary of State Antony Blinken and Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin meeting with Ukraine's president this past weekend. Now, today, President Biden nominated an ambassador to Ukraine, and American diplomats are heading back to Kyiv, the capital, of course, of Ukraine. Still, the war goes on.
On his way back to the White House this morning from Delaware, President Joe Biden met briefly with reporters.
Hey, Mr. President, did you speak with Secretary Blinken or Secretary Austin after their trip to Ukraine?
We're going to be doing that now.
It was a trip shrouded in secrecy. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken and U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin meeting face-to-face with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, the highest-level American visit to the capital, Kyiv, since Russia invaded in late February.
You getting any work out of this guy?
Secretary Blinken told reporters in Poland afterwards it was an important moment to be there to show U.S. support for Ukraine, and he slammed Russia.
Russia has sought as its principal aim to totally subjugate Ukraine, to take away its sovereignty, to take away its independence. That has failed.
Meanwhile, President Biden is remembering Orrin Hatch, the president releasing a statement. Senator Hatch was also a man of deep faith, a gentle soul who wrote songs and poems and shared them with friends, colleagues, and the world. This was the Orrin who looked out for the people who often didn't have a voice in our laws, in our country. I saw this in his efforts to pass the Americans with Disabilities Act and the Children's Health Insurance Program. Meanwhile, at the White House this afternoon, the NHL champion Tampa Bay Lightning, honored for their success on the ice.
At the risk of stating the obvious here, it's a pretty good time to be a sports fan in Tampa.
And separately tonight, it's estimated by the year 2024 there will be more than 2 million drones flying around the United States. And tonight, the Biden administration is asking Congress to better track and monitor those drones to counter any nefarious or potentially malicious activities. At the White House, Owen Jensen, EWTN News Nightly.
Coming up, a report from Ukraine following the visit of two high-ranking U.S. officials. Officials in Ukraine say there is a chance that talks with Russia on finding an end to the military conflict will resume.
Дуже складною ситуація залишається в місті Маріуполь, де противник, попри заяву.
An advisor to Ukraine's president says the talks would take place in Mariupol. The Kremlin has not yet responded. Earlier, Russia said that it would open humanitarian corridors in the besieged city. John Gambrell is a journalist from the Associated Press, and he joins us now from Lviv, Ukraine. John, thank you so much for being here. We appreciate it. Can you set the scene for us in Lviv? What is the latest, and what are you seeing there?
Well, today we saw that Russia focused its fire primarily on infrastructure sites. There was an attack on an oil facility in central Ukraine, as well as 5 points of railway infrastructure in the country, including one point not too far outside of the city here. Now, this is a change because obviously the Russians have been focused primarily on eastern Ukraine, but now moving towards the railroad facilities. That suggests that the Russians are focusing more on infrastructure. Rails remains a really important part of the transportation mix here. There are no flights coming in and out of the country given the war, and roads are marked with checkpoints, both police and military. So railway is the only way to get in and out. Obviously, we had U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken as well as U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin come in by train to Kyiv to meet with President Zelensky and come back out to Poland, where Blinken said that he believed that Russia had lost the war and that the Ukrainians had won because the Ukrainians were able to blunt that initial offensive at the beginning of the war that targeted the capital.
And John, I want to go back to that visit from Blinken and Austin. I know they pledged more support to Ukraine. What would that additional support look like, and how important would it be to Ukraine?
Well, it's tens of millions of dollars, and what it looks like initially is that they're going to buy ammunition for Soviet-era weapon systems. Now, this is really important because the Ukrainian military relies mostly on these Soviet-era weapons. So having more ammunition is going to help the Ukrainians continue the fight against the Russians. And America is also saying that they want to offer more money to other Western powers who want to sell equipment to the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians have asked for everything from more ammunition to howitzers to tanks and other systems to be able to basically blunt the ongoing offensive that we see in eastern Ukraine by the Russians.
And John, before I let you go, yesterday was Easter for most Orthodox Christians, including in Ukraine and in Russia. Could you tell if there were any celebrations of any kind or any public gatherings for the holy day?
Yeah, people did come out. I mean, typically Christians here in Ukraine, and including Russia, will normally do midnight mass. Here this year in Ukraine, they stayed away because of curfew. They came to churches early in the morning on Easter Sunday. That included soldiers who are currently fighting even in the eastern part of the country. Now, some of the places that people worshipped had been struck by fire and saw damage. But people did pray and did do their service, and even with sandbags surrounding some of the statues and other vestments at the churches, they did mark the holy day.
John, we have probably about 30 seconds left or so, but any final thoughts of what you're seeing right now in Ukraine?
Well, I think the real question is what's going to happen in Mariupol. They still have those fighters and civilians who are inside of the steel mill that is in Mariupol. That's the last point that the Ukrainians still hold in the city. The longer that they hold that position, the more that's going to tie up those Russian forces and keep them from rejoining other troops that are taking part in that eastern offensive.
John Gambrell with the Associated Press, thank you so much for your time today and your reporting. Stay safe. Funerals were held in northern Lebanon today for 7 people who died after their boat packed with migrants sank. An estimated 60 people were aboard the boat on Saturday. None had life preservers. The boat was only meant to handle 6 people. 47 survivors were rescued. Some remain missing. Authorities are still searching waters near Tripoli. Up next, celebrating the risen Christ. Orthodox Christians mark Easter in the Holy Land. Plus, celebrating divine mercy. Pope Francis encourages us to seek Christ even in our struggles. For many Orthodox Christians, yesterday was Easter in the Holy Land. Liturgy was held at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, site of the burial and resurrection of Christ. Prayers also were held throughout Ukraine, including in the capital city and in Russia. Pope Francis has named Cardinal Michael Czerny to the head of the dicastery for promoting integral human development. Cardinal Czerny has been serving as the interim leader in that position since January. He has held several leadership posts in the Holy See with responsibilities for global evangelization and care for migrants. Pope Francis has a message for the faithful. The Lord is not calling us to be perfect.
Rinnovo l'appello a una tregua pasquale, segno minimo e tangibile di una volontà di pace.
During his Divine Mercy Sunday address to pilgrims at the Vatican, the Holy Father made another plea for peace in Ukraine. He also reflected on St. Thomas from Sunday's Gospel, saying Christ wants us to seek him when we need healing and help. Well, as we mentioned earlier, today is the feast of St. Mark. It is also an important day in Italy. Today marks the 77th anniversary of the liberation of the country and the end of World War II. During that long and dramatic period, the Vatican played an important role in trying to save lives. EWTN Vatican Bureau Chief Andreas Thonhauser has more.
Today is Liberation Day in Italy, celebrating its liberation from Nazi fascism, which took place in 1945. The date represents the beginning of the withdrawal of German Nazi soldiers and fascist soldiers from the cities of Turin and Milan after the rebellion of the population and a coordinated plan by the Partigiani, the Italian resistance, to regain control of the territory. The war did not end in Italy on April 25, 1945, but it continued for some days more until the beginning of May. Meantime, at the Vatican, the Holy See had direct contact with the fascist regime, in particular with the signing of the Lateran Pacts in 1929. The agreement between the Holy See and Italy proved advantageous for both sides. For the Vatican, it meant the independence and sovereignty of the Holy See, besides the recognition of other important privileges for the Church. Relations began to deteriorate, though, when Mussolini, leader of the Italian fascist regime and head of the government, decided to tie his destiny to that of Hitler. In April of 1939, Pope Pius XII announced a plan to save the peace in the hope of a negotiation among the great European powers, then just a step away from conflict. The Holy See thus activated its apostolic nuncios in the relevant European capitals to propose a sort of last gasp conference. However, the Pope's initiative was not successful because the role of the Holy See on the international scene was considered insignificant. During the drama of the war, the Vatican worked concretely on behalf of the Jews amidst their deportation. In fact, there was an enormous network to hide Jews in monasteries, convents, and churches, even at times within the Vatican walls. According to the most recent theories, based on the publication of documents from the Vatican archive, these weren't just spontaneous initiatives, as has always been maintained. In July of 1943, Rome was bombed by the United States. At the end of the attack, Pope Pius XII went to visit the zones that were struck, blessing the victims. Images remain of that phase of the war of the Pope in the midst of the crowd, distributing monetary assistance and accompanied by the substitute for general affairs of the Secretary of State, or sostituto, the future Pope Paul VI, just as for the visit to the Basilica of St. John Lateran on August 13, 1943, on the occasion of the second bombing of the city. The next day, Rome was declared by the Italian government to be an open city, which meant that Allied troops could access the city without resistance in an attempt to save the city's residents and monuments from bombings. It was precisely the Holy See that delivered this government communication to London and Washington. While Italy effectively demilitarized the city, Germany ignored any commitment to it. The Allied governments then reserved the full liberty of action with regard to Rome, which was in fact bombed another 51 times before its liberation on June 4, 1944, 11 months before the beginning of the complete liberation of all of the territory, and another date celebrated still today in Italy as a national holiday. In Rome, Andreas Thonhauser, EWTN News Nightly.
Finally tonight, Real Batiste won the prestigious Culpa Del Rey soccer championship in Seville, Spain over the weekend. The victory set off wild celebrations among the fans while the team made its way to say a very important thank you. As the fans cheered outside, team members, coaches, and officials joined church leaders in paying homage to the Virgin of the Kings inside Seville's cathedral. Players from the winning team also offered flowers and briefly presented the trophy to the statue of Our Lady. Real Batiste won the title for the first time in 17 years, and congratulations to them. And we thank you for watching tonight. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Tracy Sable. Good night and God bless.